Good morning, everybody. Hope you're having a great morning to start the day. And Baruch Hashem, we're really rolling through this first halakha in Atil Yadayim. And as a quick summary of what we've done so far, as we conclude the first halakha, to understand the deep mysteries of what it means to wash the hands in the morning, Rabbi Nachman and his student Rab Natan are coming to explain the famous Gemara, which says that a person, that he gets up in the morning, he washes his hands, he uses the restroom, he washes his hands again, he puts on tefillin, he says Shema, it's as if he has received Ol Malchut Shemaim. And by Rabbi Nachman, Ol Malchut Shemaim is the concept of Emunah. And we know that Rabbi Nachman's whole entire Iker was Emunah, to be able to try and help us to achieve our highest spiritual potential, which is in the form of Emunah Shlema, that is complete, simple faith in the simple oneness of Hashem, in His love for us, in His being the initial cause of everything that takes place in our life, the orchestrator of all the events that occur, the life force which is pumping into reality at every moment, and how everything He does is only to bring us closer to Him. And the start of that process is washing the hands. That means that we need to first get rid of all of the false notions which we've acquired through our lifetime, through our childhood, through our schooling, through society, through social media. Because these, say Rabbi Nachman, are the greatest obstacle to being close to Hashem. Because false ideas, false ideology create within the mind a barrier which prevents one from actually feeling and experiencing that Hashem exists, that Hashem loves you, that Hashem wants the best for you, that Hashem is very near to you, and that you have purpose in your life, that you have meaning in your life, that you have something for which to strive for, which the whole universe actually depends on. Because Rabbi Nachman teaches that you have a limited bandwidth and that you're only able to truly hold on to a certain amount of consciousness at one time. And therefore, if you are full with self-consciousness or secular wisdom, what the Torah speaks about as chokhmot chitzoniut, that is external wisdom, extraneous matter, whereas our student Aaron London calls it feces of the mind. This wisdom, which is not wisdom at all, says Rav Natan, but is actually information which detracts you from wisdom, because it's bli emunah, it's without emunah, it's without da'at, it's without spiritual content. So we need to get rid of it through washing of the hands. The washing of the hands represents learning the deep teachings of Chassidut, of Kabbalah, the Sod, the secrets of Torah. And through doing this, you're able to expel all of the prior information which has inhibited you from now taking steps in your life to creating a spiritual makom, a spiritual place in this world where you experience the light of godliness, the light of the Ein Sof in your life. And it's by lifting up the hands, which happens through putting your hands in that water, those waters of da'at, those waters of higher consciousness, those waters of chassidus, those waters of the tzaddik yesod olam. Now, through this, your hands lift up. And what's interesting is that according to Kabbalah, it's the lifting up of the hands that purifies the mind. It's the lifting up of the hands, it's the emunah, it's the tefillah, it's the hope itself that actually creates the space in the mind for clarity, for happiness, for true wisdom, through lack of confusion. And Rav Natan says, and this is explicitly what it says in the Shulchan Aruch, that is, that Rav Yosef Cairo, who was a disciple of the Ramak, around the same time as the Arizal HaKadosh existed. They both were in Tzfat, and he wrote the Shulchan Aruch. And he says there that based on that Gemara, that we have all of these laws about what we need to do when we get up in the morning. He says now afterwards, "Shasur liga kodem natila el peh v'chotem v'anaim v'aznaim," and that afterwards, thus, it's a sur. You're not allowed before that you wash your hands to touch your face, touch your mouth specifically, to touch your nose, to touch your eyes, or to touch your ears. Meaning that when you wake up in the morning, prior to washing your hands with water, which we know represents the waters of Da'at, the waters of higher consciousness, the waters of the revelation that the Baal Shem Tov brought into the world and was manifested in his most potent way through Rabbi Nachman, you can't touch your mouth, you can't touch your nose, you can't touch your eyes, you can't touch your ears. Because of the concept of the 7 candles of the menorah, that they receive the light of the face. So we need a little bit of an introduction now to understand what Rav Natan is speaking about. There's an amazing Torah in the Likutey where Rabbi Nachman explains that in order for a person to be able to achieve what he calls the surrounding light, the Or Makif, which is represented by the Sukkah, that on Sukkot we have the Sukkah that we sit in, and this Or which surrounds us, this light which represents the light of the Shekhinah, the light of Hashem, which actually comes from Olam Haba, it comes from a separate plane of existence, which is higher than this plane, which is purely spiritual. And yet it has the capacity to enter into our personal lives, into our personal space in this world. And Rabbi Nachman says, you can actually taste it now, you can touch it now, you can feel it now, you can experience it now. However, the only way to do so is you have to light up your own personal menorah. And Rabbi Nachman says, how do you do that? He says, by makadashing, by sanctifying the 7 orifices of the face. That is, that through makadashing the eyes, the ears, the 2 nostrils, and the mouth, you have 7 orifices there, 7 holes. And Rabbi Nachman says that the menorah is actually a physical manifestation of these 7 orifices of the face. Now, what's the connection between these 2? Why does that matter? Because we know that all the lights of the menorah, the 7 lights of the menorah, they all were pointing towards the middle shaft, which was the 7th. When all the lights were pointing towards the middle shaft, now that they're lit up, the middle light can be lit up. That middle light represents the light of Hashem's face, which represents the revelation of godliness, which will only be revealed in the future with the coming of Mashiach, which is the light of pure echad, the light of pure oneness, the light of pure achdut, unity, the light of connection, the light of peace, the light of truth. These are all represented and called in the language of Kabbalah, the Or Panim, the light of Hashem's face. And this is represented by the middle shaft of the menorah. Now, Rabbi Nachman says, why is it that Hashem said that the lights have to move towards, they have to be facing towards the middle shaft? Which you see by the way in which the Rambam codifies in Halachah how the menorah actually looked in the Beit HaMikdash. So the deep reason is because those lights on the side represent the orifices of the face. They represent the holes in which we experience and we draw in new information, new wisdom, new understanding, new stimuli, which comes from the eyes through which we see and the ears through which we hear, the nostrils through which we smell, and the mouth through which we taste and which we speak. And Rabbi Nachman says that when a Jew makes sure that his eyes only see good and his ears are mekadesh. How do you mekadesh the ears? Rabbi Nachman says by having complete, simple bitachon in true tzaddikim. That when I trust in real tzaddikim completely, without any type of sophistication, without any type of questioning, challenging, but to understand that just like the Torah is true, and just like Hashem is true, and just like I exist, that there is a thing called real tzaddikim, And they are just as much true as the Torah, as Hashem, as myself. And therefore, when I have complete, simple trust in them, in their wisdom, in their advice, and then I live out with that advice, and I actualize in my life, not based on understanding, but based on emunah, based on bitachon, then I've sanctified my ears. So now they are mekadesh, so to speak, they are lit up. Now that I only see good, and I have complete trust in real tzaddikim, and I follow their eitzah, so now my ears are lit up, my eyes are lit up. What about the nostrils? So Rabbi Nachman said this is corresponding to yira. That is, that when I have awe of Hashem, that as opposed to having fear of people, places, and things, and instead I only have yira of Hashem. And Rabbi Nachman explains in that Torah, the surest proof of that is that you're not getting angry. Because if a person gets angry, it means that he doesn't really believe that what's taking place is from Hashem, which shows that he has a lacking in the area of yira of Hashem, because he thinks that what's happening is from people, places, and things, and therefore the nostrils are blemished. But if I only have awe of Hashem, and I'm not now concerned in fear of people, places, and things, circumstances in my life, because I realize everything is from Hashem, then the nostrils are mekadesh. And then finally the mouth, that Rabbi Nachman says that to make sure that you're always speaking truth, that the words that come out of your mouth are truth. And when you're constantly making sure that you're speaking about the truth, which doesn't just mean that I'm saying something that really happened, because even that is only subject to interpretation by yourself through your own heart. But when I speak words of Torah, when I speak words of emunah, when I speak words of chizuk, that I encourage others to be their best self, to try and get closer to Hashem, to believe in themselves, those are called true words. Those mekadesh the mouth. And when all of those 7 holes are mekadesh, they are lit up, so to speak. Then what happens, Rabbi Nachman says, is that you have an or makif. You have a surrounding light, which you have created through all the mitzvot that you have done, but you've never touched, you've never tasted, you've never experienced as of yet. Because the whole concept of makif is that it surrounds your consciousness. It transcends your consciousness. You don't experience it in a felt way in this world. However, Rabbi Nachman says that by taking these 7 steps, by lighting up these 7 orifices of the face, then what ends up happening is that middle shaft begins to light as well. That means that the mind, it becomes conscientious of things which are normally transcending it. And so to speak, it downloads those higher consciousness which you have created and you don't even recognize, you don't experience in your own personal life, because by default, they surround your mind. They don't enter your mind while you're alive. But through this mechanism of makadeshing the 7 orifices of the face, you actually download it and do experience it while you are physically alive. And this is the source of peace, and this is the source of feeling oneness with Hashem. This is the source of deveikut, clinging and cleaving to Hashem, to have connection, to feel the unity and oneness of existence. That all comes from experiencing the Or Panim, the light of Hashem's face. And this is the deeper reason why Rav Natan says that before you wash your hands in the morning, the Shulchan Aruch, Rav Yosef Cairo tells us, you can't touch your mouth, you can't touch your eyes, you can't touch your ears, and you can't touch your nostrils. Why? Because these are the 7 orifices of the mind. And according to Kabbalah, when these are blemished, then a Jew is not able to experience the higher levels of his own consciousness. He's not able to experience the higher levels of his own neshama, his own soul. So as a result of that, by being cut off from that, he's now cut off in his own consciousness from godliness. And then he becomes an Eved of Mitzrayim. He becomes in servitude to the physical world, and he's only working in order to continue to build paros, pyramids, buildings, existence, meaning that the physical world's demand that you must eat instantaneously, that you must drink instantaneously, that you must have pleasure instantaneously, that you must watch whatever they put on TV, and you must listen to whatever advertisements they have and whatever music is put on the radio. You must. Why? Because it's not normal if you don't. But says Chassidut that this is really a very dangerous enterprise, and that in truth, all of the manifestations, all the outpourings of people that they're not connected to spirituality. What's flowing out of them is a very low frequency of consciousness. And as a result of that, when you're imbibing that, when you're drinking that, when you're getting drunk off of that, no pun intended, then as a result of that, you fall asleep. And you're not able to find the Shekhinah, you're not able to find the Shem in your life. This is connected to Rabbi Nachman speaks about in the first story, Sipur Masiot, which he gave 4 years ago before he passed away, the first of his 13 amazing, magnificent, epic stories, where he speaks about and is alluding to, at least according to a few of the big commentaries on this Torah, that the viceroy, the second in command to the king, he represents you. He represents me. He represents us. He represents the Jewish soul, that he is drawn down into this physical world, the place where there's no good, meaning the place where the forces of negativity have strength. They have the capability to have the upper hand if we let it. And this is the reason for the challenges and the confusions and the difficulties of our life, personally and collectively. And the lost princess, who represents the Shekhinah, who represents the revelation of godliness, who we said we told the king we're going to run after her, we're going to look for her, meaning that we're going to look for Hashem. We're going to go find Hashem even in this very dark space of the physical world, even in the crevices and the hard pit, which this world often feels like and is experienced by us, because in truth, in some ways it is. But we said we're going to find the princess even there. We're going to find the Shekhinah even there. We're going to reveal godliness even there in those places. Now, the first thing the princess tells the viceroy is that you can't eat from that tree, the tree of apples, and you can't eat and drink on that last day. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to free me. Because this all represents, according to Rav Aryeh Kaplan, according to the very big Mekubal and leading authority in Breslov Chassidus, Rav Yitzchak Meir Morgenstern, our generation, this represents taiva. That when I give into physical taiva, when I allow myself to be a slave to limitation, to allow myself to be a slave to my ego, to be a slave to physicality, specifically in the area of physical desires, then as a result of that, I cut myself off from the lost princess. And I'm not able to rescue her from the place of no good, meaning I'm not able to experience this consciousness which I lost, and in a felt, deep, palpable way. And not only am I not able to accomplish that, but ultimately, as a result of that, he ends up falling asleep for years. Because what ends up happening after we give in, then ultimately there's a period after the falling in for the taiva where it looks like the best thing possible, it feels like the best thing possible, but then afterwards you lose your chiyut, you lose your life force, you lose your motivation, you lose your excitement, and this is not just spiritually, you also see this physically. If, for instance, a person, he's excited about starting a new business, he wants to start over again, he wants to try something new, and all of a sudden he sees something on TV, he gets really excited and interested by it, and then all of a sudden he's watching TV for hours. What happens to his motivation for him starting that business? Oh, I'll start tomorrow. Well, why did it change? Just because you watched a TV show, why should afterwards I have lost my motivation to now begin anew, to help myself to be in a better financial position than I was yesterday? There should be no connection. But the reason is because when I give in to taiva for physicality alone, then ultimately as a result of that, you end up having a period of falling asleep. Sorry, 1 second. And by the way, this is another secret as to why you see that very, very, very successful people, they're not watching a lot of television. So on the one hand, you say, well, yeah, because they're accomplishing a lot, they're doing a lot. However, the hidden secret here is that, and they might not even be aware of it, especially people who are not aware of what we're talking about now, which we'll say is 99.9% of the world. So just by way of the fact that they're always busy trying to achieve and accomplish something in the world, so as a result of that, they're not watching as much media, which obviously now is a different story because you could just go on your phone at any second. But as a result of that, they don't have their chiyut taken from them. Their life force, their motivation for achieving isn't removed from them. As it is when a person, he's sucked into physical desire. Or obviously, let's say you have food, right? You're in the morning, you want to eat something. So let's say I had plans for this morning. I wanted to get up early. I wanted to go pray nates. I wanted to go to the mikvah. I wanted to go do hibodedut. And now all of a sudden I wake up and I'm starving. So now what am I thinking to myself? Oh my gosh, that bagel store is like, those egg and cheese sandwiches are amazing. It's right next door. And I'm not speaking as a person who didn't think that way. My whole entire life has been bound up with the pursuit of food. You can ask my wife. This is how I grew up. But ultimately, what ends up happening is if you're constantly focused on it, then obviously you're not focused on something else, at least not completely. So you're not present in those hours that you're focused on the taiva. And then on top of that, when you actually get it, first of all, it's never as good as you imagined it. And secondly, after you're done eating it, you feel horrible. You feel tired, you feel lethargic, you feel lack of energy, you feel lack of motivation. Sometimes you even feel sick, right? So what ended up happening? My mom has just wasted my whole morning and now possibly my whole day. All because of what? Because of bread and an egg and cheese. Now on paper, if you're going to go do a hibodedut and you're going to sit and have time away from the world, in the forest, in the fields, to just sit and contemplate the purpose of your life, why you're here, what you could be doing. So you're going to see very clearly that this doesn't make sense, that I should invest 24 hours in things which don't actually benefit my life at all, and sometimes even detract for the sake of what? So, but in the moment, we don't think that way. And this is the whole entire reason why Rabbi Nachman says that we must do hibodedut every single day. Because a Jew, a person in this physical world, which is connected to the consciousness of darkness, which is prone to being captured by the king, that the lost princess is prone to being captured by her, because the taiva looks good in the moment. The thing looks good in the moment. And therefore, Rabbi Nachman says you have to continuously be speaking to Hashem, because this is your only way above and out. But let's say, for instance, I have Makadish, the 7 orifices of my face. Now you receive the light of the face. Hainu aseichel, meaning you now draw down intellect, meaning God consciousness. Kabbalah hu mi'adayim. But the chiddush here is that you receive it from the hands. And this goes to show again why Rabbi Nachman stressed Emunah above all else. Why did Rabbi Nachman stress simple faith as being the highest, greatest spiritual madrega that a person can have, even more than knowing the whole entire Torah, which many people would scoff at such a statement, that to have a simple faith like a woman or like a child, without knowing any of Gemara, without knowing any halakha, without knowing X, Y, and Z, is the highest spiritual level. And this is what the Baal Shem Tov taught as well, that this is the highest thing in the world. And what's the reason? Because it represents the source and the life force for consciousness. Because when I have Emunah, meaning when my hands are lifted, so then as a result of that, it's taught in Kabbalah and Chassidut that the lifting up of the hands represents the lighting up of the menorah, and this causes the mind to be clear, to be conscious, to have clarity, to have energy, to have life force, to have chidushim, to have novelties of understanding about how to grow, about how to get closer to good, about how to succeed. But like when that the hands, that they are tameh, like when you get up in the morning before you wash them, then you're able to receive the opposite from them. Not seichel, not da'at, not consciousness, but you're receiving tumah, secular wisdom, chitzoniut, lack of life force, lack of energy, lack of hope, lack of faith, lack of connection, lack of peace within yourself. And this is all received from the hands. So we see that the hands are the ikr, because the hands can either be the greatest source of blessing, because the hands, when they're lifted up, they represent tefillah, which exists, the summit of existence. They represent Emunah Shlema when the hands are lifted up, like Moshe Rabbeinu on the mountain while the Jewish people were fighting the war. And when his hands were up, they were winning that war, meaning that we personally were overcoming all the difficulties and challenges in our life. And when his hands were down, we were losing that war, because tefillah, Rabbi Nachman says, is the key to overcoming all of our opposition, challenges, miniyot, obstacles in our life. But when the hands are down, meaning when there's tuma on the hands, like when we wake up in the morning from sleeping, then it causes the opposite. And then if you touch your mouth, you touch your eyes, you touch your nose, you touch your ears, then you actually increase the problem. And that's why it says afterwards, you should say Kriyat Shema. Shehi Kabbalat Ol Malchut Shemayim. And then you receive Ol Malchut Shemayim. Like the Gemara says, that you merit all of this by first going to the restroom, washing the hands, putting on tefillin, which we said means you're removing secular wisdom, you're washing your hands in da'at, in the consciousness of Chassidus, in the consciousness of the Torah of Rabbi Nachman ben Fega, in the higher levels of the secrets of the Torah. And then you place on tefillin because now you have chayim, now you have life, now you have drawn down arichut yamim, length of days, extended breathing, life. This is the concept of revelation from what was previously hidden. Like it says in the Devarim, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. When we say Hashem, Shema Yisrael, saying listen, Israel. But listen, Shema in the Torah really means to understand. Meaning that you are reorienting yourself to reality. You're trying to wake up the lost princess within you. You're trying to awaken your neshama. You're saying, listen, Israel, that part in you that's called Israel, that part in you that is your nefesh elokit, your godly soul. Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Hashem is our God. Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei, represents good when Hashem reveals himself to you. Elokeinu represents din, it represents justice, it represents constrictions, concealments in our life. So which one is it? Hashem Elokeinu? Is it Hashem or is it Elokeinu? And the end of it is Hashem Echad. It's all one. That this is the entire purpose of existence, for you to come to the internalization, to the drawing down, to the felt experience in the mind, heart, and soul, that Hashem Elokeinu, that both the good and the seemingly bad, Hashem Echad, it's really all Hashem and it's all one and it's all good. Just like it says in Masechet Pesachim, that what's the difference between Olam Haba and Olam Hazeh, that we say, Bayomahu, on that day, Hashem will be one and his name will be one. He's not now. And the answer is, and this is the entire chiluk, the entire distinction that they give in the Gemara, is that right now we make a distinction between good and bad, but in the future we don't make any distinction. We say everything is good. Meaning to say that the only difference between now and then is that then there's going to be a conscious recognition that everything is really Hashem, whereas now we're under the false impression that some things are and some things are not. So if we're able to chop it now, so you have a taste of Olam Haba, which Rabbi Nachman says is not only possible for everybody, it is actually the ikar mission of each and every one of us in our lifetime, is to get to the point that we are conscious of this reality. And that is Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Now, interestingly, when Yaakov Avinu had all of these, on paper, horrible experiences, traumatic experiences, bewildering experiences from his childhood, of his older brother hating him vehemently, to his father favoring his older brother, to ultimately him having to run away after listening to his mother. Now that he's on the run, he ends up with his father-in-law, or sorry, I should say his uncle, Lavan, who he ends up working for over 2 decades, who is constantly tricking him and taking advantage of him every single day and not even hiding it. And all the meanwhile, while that's happening, the love of his life, who he's working for, she herself is not given to him, and he has to marry another woman. But because he's such a good guy, says the Orach Chaim, he would never leave that person. So now he has to work another 7 years for the one he actually married. But he still can't even leave after that. And he ultimately has to be there for 20 years, 22 years. And then after this, he finally has children. But then when he has these children, there's strife between them. They all hate Yaakov's favorite child, Yosef. And as a result of that, when he was 17 years old, they threw him into a pit. And then he was, according at least to Yaakov's mind, of his understanding, that his son died. And to have to live with that, especially after Hashem had guaranteed that he would be the whole entire cause of the reality that would be called Yisrael, that he is Yisrael, that he's the root, he is the Neshama Kalit, he is the all-encompassing soul which gave birth to all the Jewish people. But that would only happen if his children were all whole, and now one of his children, his favorite one, dies in his mind. He has to deal with his other two sons, that they end up not listening to him and putting the entire family in a very dangerous position. Having the daughter, she was also raped. And his whole entire life was like this, just on and on and on and on, trial after difficulty, after obstacle, after horror, until he actually saw Paro. And when Paro saw him, he said to Yaakov, preempted him and said, "Why?" Paro said, "Why do you look so old?" He said, "Oh, you don't realize it's because I've been through a lot in my life. So I look much older than I actually am." But when Yaakov Avinu came down to Mitzrayim and he saw that Yosef was still alive, and he hugged him, and it said that Yosef was crying hysterically on his shoulder, and that Yaakov Avinu started to say Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Because these were the two experiences of their life. That Yosef's son, Yaakov's son, who missed his father so much, who had been away from his family for all these years, he finally gets to see his father, who he loves so dearly after all this time. And like any child who is disconnected from his parents for whatever reason, that it's obviously a very painful experience. And to be able to see after all of this time that he's still there and that he made it, he's still alive, and he lives with all the things that his father taught him, even in circumstances which would pull anybody else to the opposite. And that relief after all that time of having to be so strong and to be able to just cry now on his father's shoulder. But his father, realizing in this moment that this was a complete full circle of his life, that in truth, everything that's ever taken place in his life was to lead to this moment. And that it was really all for the good. And that Yaakov's initial response automatically was to say, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Because at that moment he realized in truth, not just in faith, that Hashem and Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, all of the good and the bad is really one. It's all from Hashem. And that's called the revelation that comes from the concealment. Shafilu bechol hastarot, that even in all of the concealments, kulam mikablim chiyut mimenu, that Rabbi Nachman teaches, and this is his prime chiddush, that it enlivens the Jewish people, that it gives us hope, it gives us energy, it gives us excitement, it gives us faith that things will get better. That is that even within the concealment, Hashem himself is giving birth and he's giving life force to those events and those circumstances which are hiding him. And there really is no place in which he's empty, where he's void. He's everywhere. And this is what it says in the Zohar Kadosh. That the Zohar says that you need to extend the Dalet at the end of Echad. That when you say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, you have to extend the Dalet. Why? Hadahu dechtiv. This is like it says, L'ma'an yarich yamim al mamlachto. In order to extend the days on his kingship. Because we know she'ikar kriyat Shema shu Dalet of Echad. That the essence of Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, the whole entire ikar of Natan says, is actually in the final letter, is the Dalet. Because the Dalet represents Malchut in Kabbalah. The Dalit represents the darkness of our lives, which Hashem is completely concealed from. And yet, in the end, the concealment itself turns into the greatest revelation of godliness. And this is represented by the manifestation, the full manifestation of Malchut in human form, whose name was David. That David himself was the living embodiment of the sphere of Malchut. He is the Dalit at the end of Echad. That he's the Iker of Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Because David's whole entire life is filled with darkness, not unlike Yaakov's. But as opposed to Yaakov, that he had a direct experience of Hashem, that he heard from him. Similar to Moshe Rabbeinu, David, much more like us, doesn't experience Hashem at all in a palpable way. Everything is through his felt sense, but nothing is through prophetic experience. Everything has to be through faith, not through the level of conscious truth. But in the end, that place of darkness, that place of concealment, gives birth to the Mashiach, gives birth to the King of Israel, gives birth to the Redeemer of the Jewish people, gives birth to the Dalit, gives birth to David. And this is the extension of the Dalit at the end. And the whole entire concept of the extension of the Dalit at the end of Echad, that what you're meditating on is that you're drawing in the waters of the Mikvah into the Dalit, because the whole secret of Rabbi Nachman is that the Dalit represents influence, meaning our ability to influence others in a positive way, to influence ourselves in a positive way, which means that we are trying to get closer to Hashem and we're trying to help others to achieve spiritual excellence. So as a result of that, we have the Malchut of Kedusha, we have the Dalit now. But our ability to be effective in that, to help ourselves and to help others, is only to the degree to which we're holding on to truth. And not just any truth, but the highest level of truth, da'at, the da'at that is represented by the waters of the mikvah. And those waters of the mikvah, they're represented by the chet in Echad, because the chet is gematria 8. The gematria of 8 represents something which is above consciousness. It's something that's above the physical world. It's something that's above normative experience. And when we experience the 8, the chet, the chokhmah, the waters of Chasidut, then as a result of that, and we draw that into our dalit, into our capacity to influence ourselves and others in a positive way, then we're able to use it in that genuinely beneficial way for ourselves and those around us. And also, this gives birth to the Mashiach inside of you, because the Mashiach inside everybody is called David. He's called King David. He's called your Malchut. He's called your aspect of kingship or influence. And only through the waters of Da'at is David able to be effective. Only through the Nevuah of Shmuel Hanavi is David able to reign as king. Only through Eliyahu Hanavi is Mashiach ben David able to reign as king. Because it is the waters of Da'at that come from the Tzaddik Yisod Olam that gives birth to the Mashiach. And this is hinted to when Rabbi Nachman said at the end of his life that I have achieved one thing. I have given birth to a soul who comes from Atzilut, which is the highest spiritual world, and he's the Mashiach. Now, obviously, that person who he thought was, which is his son, Shlomo Ephraim, he passed away as a young child. And he was very, very tormented over this. And he said that not only are we not going to have the Geula now, but it's going to be a little bit of time before it happens as a result. And obviously now it's been over 200 years since then. But it remains the same paradigm. That is to say that the only way that the Mashiach is going to be able to have the power in which to overcome all of the enemies of the Jewish people, to be the Rei Mehemna, to be the faithful shepherd of Klal Yisrael, like Moshe Rabbeinu was in his generation, is only by soaking in the waters of the Tzaddik Yisod Olam. By him soaking his malchut, his capacity to speak in a way which influences others, that he's constantly swimming in the waters of Da'at. As a result of that, his koach, his power, his capacity to speak in a way which causes an impact and influence in the world and within himself, that is all grown stronger and stronger and stronger through drawing down length of days, through drawing down da'at, through his immersing in the mikvah of Chassidut, of Kabbalah. And this is all hinted to within the Gemara, where it says, that everyone that he goes to the restroom when he wakes up, he washes his hands, he places on tefillin, he says Kriyat Shema, ki'ilu kibel ol malchut shemayim shlema. It's as if he received on himself ol malchut shemayim shlema, completely. Ki kol hu bechinat shlemu to malchut, because it's through all of these steps, and only through all of these steps, in the order in which they're given, that a person can perfect his quality of malchut. He can perfect his quality of personal influence. He can perfect his quality of communal influence, of societal influence, of universal influence, of spiritual and physical influence. That he can perfect his quality of authority over himself, his quality of helping to transform and change those around him. This is the quality of malchut. Then he gets it shlema, that it's complete now. And this is what our sages taught us. That it's considered also thus as if he had immersed himself. Because the concept of the washing of the hands, it's like a little tiny manifestation as if I had washed my whole body in a mikvah. Meaning I'm waking up in the morning, and because we understand that my ability and my capacity to make good choices in my life, to influence myself and others in a positive way, is dependent on me dipping in the waters of the mikveh. So how do I access that immediately when I wake up? It's by the washing of the hands, and through doing that immediately next to your bed. I've told you guys the story in the past, but for anybody who doesn't know, I was suggested to me by a person who I actually feel was a revelation of Eliyahu and Navi. I'm not going to get into that right now, but he had a lot of interesting things to say to me. But one of those things that he told me to do, which he really, really encouraged me to do, was to meet the Biali Rebbe. He is a very, very big Hasidic master who lives in the land of Israel. He spends a lot of time giving eitzah to people all around the world. He's known for having Ruach HaKodesh, for having these higher levels of consciousness. And when I went to him and I told him a lot of different things that were going on in my life, so he told me one thing, which I'm going to keep private. And then the next thing he asked me is, do you do Netilas Yadayim? So I said, yeah, when I get up, I go to the restroom or I go to the kitchen and I wash my hands. And he gave me a look, like of disapproval. So what's the reason that I was doing that? Because Rav Ovadia Yosef, who's the posek of the generation for Sephardim, he says that your whole entire home is considered Dalat Amot. It's considered your 4 Amot, because the Shulchan Aruch says that you should wash your hands within 4 Amot, that you shouldn't walk 4 Amot before washing your hands. Because what we're learning now is that the forces of negativity in the world, that they accumulate on the hands. So you don't want those on your hands when you move 4 Amot, because now you've entered into another space with that, and that's when it begins to be able to take negative effect on a person. However, Rav Ovadia explains, based on the Gemaras, based on Halachah, that in truth, and it's a beautiful chiddush, that your whole entire home is considered 4 Amot. So I was relying on that. However, for the Hasidic masters, they don't rely on such a thing. And one of the reasons is because of these deep Kabbalistic implications which we're speaking about. That is, what is the real tremendous impact of a person waking up in the morning, having that tumah in his hands, not getting rid of it through the waters of da'at, through the waters of the mikvah. And instead, you must, according to the Shulchan Aruch itself, and that they don't rely on any heter, that you should do it right away. And I said to him, it's really such a big deal? And he said, Vadai, absolutely. So anyway, Baruch Hashem, since then, just a note for anybody, whoever gets to visit a big tzaddik, ask for eitzah. The benefit and the blessing of the eitzah comes when you listen. That is, whether you understand it or you don't understand it, whether you agree or you don't agree, the degree to which you accept makabel, the eitzah that you ask for, to that degree you experience the blessing from that thing. So don't go to somebody unless you want to do whatever they say. Otherwise, you don't see a blessing, and sometimes you can feel the opposite. But now that we have washed our hands right next to our bed, so that's the concept of I have dipped in the mikvah. Kemuvar, sham, and sham. And it's this concept of the mikvah, bechina da'at elyon, which is the concept of higher da'at, because we know that according to Kabbalah, there's two levels of da'at. There's da'at tachton, and there's da'at elyon. There is the lower da'at, which is still higher than anything in this physical world. And then there's the higher da'at, the da'at elyon, which is connected to the keter, which is connected to the crown of consciousness. And this is the mikvah itself. And that's why the waters of the mikvah are so beneficial for Jewish men and Jewish women, because they have within them what in Kabbalah they term the chasadim. These are the spiritual forces which reveal godliness in the world, which Rav Natan now is calling the chasadim gedolim, the great chasadim. This is the essence of the perfection of malchut, of the power of influence, of the power of emunah. That all comes through the mikvah, through the water. Ein heter be'Torah. Look really good at that Torah. That's Bayom Bikurim. V'tavin hadavarim, and understand the matters that Rabbi Nachman explains in that Torah. Ki kol ze nichta b'kitzer, because everything that we've explained so far in this first law in washing of the hands, this is only b'kitzer. I'm only giving you a little bit of a taste of what Rabbi Nachman teaches in that lesson with Moran. It's impossible. Lehavin hetev hadavarim. It's impossible to understand well the matters, unless you really, really investigate deeply that Torah. This is the end of the first halacha in the washing of the hands, Baruch Hashem. Thank God, as my wife does. Yeah, so we should feel good about ourselves. We should feel happy. Thank God. We have now, after a few days, been able to experience the first law in the next section of Likutey Halachot, which is the laws of the washing of the hands. And Bezrat Hashem, tomorrow morning, we will bring down another Torah, Rabbi Nachman ben Fega in Likutey Moran, as the source for which to understand a deeper and a different mechanism of washing of the hands and why it's so important in our lives. Does anybody have any questions from today's lesson?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So I wake up in the morning, and it doesn't matter if I had to wake up earlier in the middle of the night to go to the washroom. In the morning, I wake up, put my legs down, and I say, Moda ani l'fanecha. Then I take water and go right, left, right, left, right, left, and say, Al Natias Yadayim, or you don't do the bracha?
Good question. So first thing is your feet shouldn't hit the floor before you wash your hands. If you could. That you should try your very best before your feet touch the floor and before your hands touch your face to wash your hands instantaneously while you're still on your bed. And then you should not say the bracha because you have to first go to use the restroom and then do the second washing. After you do the second washing, then you make the bracha and then you're able to say all the other brachot.
Do you say Modeh Ani before you do that?
So you should say Modeh Ani as soon as you get up before you do all of that, but you should make sure as best as you can not to touch or do anything before you say Modeh Ani, only to get up. And then after you say Modeh Ani, the reason why you don't say Hashem's name there is for the same reason that you can't say brachot. So because you don't say Hashem's name, you're able to say Modeh Ani, but then you instantaneously should wash your hands while you're still on your bed, and then you should get up and your feet should touch the floor.
So then you can go to the washroom, and then you go, and then you come out and you say Baruch Asher Yatzar, and then you can go to the kitchen and wash your hands and then say the bracha.
So then after you go to the restroom, then you're going to go to the bathroom, and when you go to the bathroom, you're going to do Netilat Yadayim there, right? Mm-hmm. And then once you say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam Mashiach Kiddushanu Tzitav Tzivanu, and then you lift up your hands, which we're learning the secret of in this Torah, because it represents the lifting up the hands from Tumah to be able to experience a higher level of consciousness. So now that I put them in the waters of Da'at, and now I'm able to experience that my Malchut is becoming more complete, my Emunah is becoming more complete, and I'm able to experience that Hashem is the cause of my life. So that's by the lifting up. Now that I've done that, I use the towel, I dry it up, I go sit down, and I say Birkot HaShachar. I say all of the blessings of the morning.
Okay. Please, one more question.
Yeah, go
So
ahead.
when you're on
These are
the
great
edge-
questions. Go ahead.
The edge of the bed, is it 3 times right? And then, no, I'm sorry. It's right, left, right, left, right, left. But then after you go to the washroom and come out before the bracha, then it's 3 times right, 3 times left?
No, it's the same exact process. It's the same hand washing. The reason why we have 2 is because the first time is before you use the restroom, and therefore you can't make a bracha after that. The second time, now that you've been to the restroom, now you can use Hashem's name. So it's the same exact process of alternating between right and left both times.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome. Great questions. You should have a lot of hatzlacha in trying to keep the Shulchan Aruch. It'll be a big blessing for you.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions?
I have a question, Rabbi.
Go ahead.
Well, I have a washroom that's less than 4 amos from my bed.
Okay.
So should I still wash at my bedside?
You should, if you can.
Okay.
This is going beyond the letter of the meaning. If you do it within 4 amot, according to the Shulchan Aruch, you fulfilled the mitzvah. But according to the Hasidic masters and the Kabbalah specifically, I even heard from one big Mekubal that he said that if you can wash your hands before your feet touch the floor, you're putting yourself in position for a really good day. So best thing you can do if you're capable of it is to do it right away.
Okay. The first time I wash, I always say Reishish Chakama Yeraz Adonai. No?
No, you don't say Hashem's name on the first time. You don't say Hashem's name until you use the restroom, and then you wash outside.
So when do you say? Because I thought in the Sefer it says that's the first time you wash.
Yeah, no, there's no one would suggest, unless you're saying the name without saying, and you just say Hashem, Reshit Chochmah Yirat Hashem, then I guess it's feasible. But otherwise it's probably talking about when you wash your hands the second time, which maybe looks like the first time. I would have to see.
Okay, so the first time you don't say any blessing.
Yeah, no blessing. You can't say Hashem's name until you use the restroom.
And then the second time, do you say Reishish or you say?
So I don't know which siddur you have. I've actually never seen that. But you could say anything once you have washed your hands after using the restroom. But in general, you're not really supposed to say anything from the Torah until you say Birkat Torah. That is, that you make the bracha on the Torah. Now, while the ikar of that is the learning of Torah, it's not necessarily the saying of Torah. But the Shulchan Aruch suggests very much that even just the saying of it, you should wait until you say the bracha on Torah itself.
So then after we use the restroom, we still really shouldn't say the prayer until after we do
all the brachot in the morning. Yeah.
Okay.
Which siddur do you have, by the way?
I have the art scroll.
Interesting. Okay, so Bezrat Hashem, maybe I'll get a chance to look at it and check it out and see how that jives.
It's Ashkenaz.
Yeah, no, I know. I my parents are. I was adopted into the Sephardic world, so I'm familiar with Ashkenazi gefilte fish. So I'm gonna check out the art scroll.
I hope to be adopted into the Sephardic world as well.
Yeah, we all do. You know, everybody. It's like white people want to be black, and the other way. You know. But Bezrat Hashem, I'm gonna look into it. I think I have an art scroll siddur from when I was first becoming Baal Tshuva, and Bezrat Hashem, I'll get back to you.
Okay, I have one last question about the mikvah.
Go ahead.
So I became Baal Tshuva about a year and a half ago, or almost 2 years now, and I'm not married, so I don't go to the mikvah monthly. But I've never been to the mikvah, and I would like to go, and I would like to go regularly, but it doesn't seem like they really allow that at any of the shuls in my community.
I understand.
I've asked several times, and I keep getting politely ignored.
Turned down. Right. So the reason is because a lot of these things that we're referring to, we're speaking about, they are a greater vulnerability for men than women because of the different features of the Jewish soul. That the Jewish female soul deals with certain struggles, the Jewish male soul deals with certain struggles. Now, in our generation, they become conflated, at least externally, because of multimedia, because of social media, because of societal education. And as a result of that, sometimes it ends up appearing like we feel and see and experience all the same things. But I think most people, when they're honest, even within that, they can ascertain that there's some differences between men and women. So this thing that the mikvah is so beneficial for is the area of the Brit, which is much more potent as a challenge in general. Obviously, this is outside of a person has experienced trauma or other things like this, but for men than for women. So therefore, if I was a woman, I would focus a lot more on the learning of Rabbi Nachman's Torah, because Rabbi Nachman says, "I am a mikvah," and that itself, because the purpose of it is to achieve clarity of mind. And Rabbi Nachman says specifically, when you learn my Torah, that you should make chidushim. That is, that you should try to create new, novel understandings of my Torah within your own personal life. And by doing that, it's like dipping in a mikveh, mamash, literally. So I would say that it's not necessary. Now, obviously, Bezrat Hashem, if and when you get married, so then you would, it'll become more applicable for you. But there's really no circumstance that Jewish law doesn't jive with Kabbalah, meaning they really go hand in hand. So if the Torah says that a woman doesn't have to or is not permitted to do something, it's because that person doesn't need a tikkun in that area. Otherwise, there would be a mitzvah for that.
Okay, I understand that. Last question. In terms of the concept of learning the Torah is dipping into the mikvah, would you say that's also true of meditation?
So if you're meditating based on these types of Torah, if the meditation is let's say, for instance, the meditation is based on the Hasidic masters or the Kabbalistic masters, something that they teach, something that they give over to us, and you're meditating on those concepts and with those mechanisms which they gave us, so then it could have a similar effect. But this is the main ikar, where you see the benefit of Rabbi Nachman's teachings is when you go into your hibodedut, into that secluded meditation that he says for Jewish men and women is the highest avoda, it's the highest spiritual experience, and it brings you to the highest places. It's specifically in that space that you turn that Torah into tefillah, that when you speak out those things in which you learned, then you will start to derive chidushim, new understandings in your own personal life, which Rabbi Nachman says comes via actually Ruach HaKodesh that every Jewish man and woman has in potential. You start to experience that and feel it during your meditations, and that itself creates the mikvah-like effect for the mind.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Great questions. Anybody
Rabbi.
else? Yes.
Kodesh Tov. Just
Tov.
what Torah were you teaching from?
So we thank God, we finished recently the entire first section of Likutey Halachot, which was the laws of getting up in the morning, and we have moved into the second section, which is Netilat Yadayim, that is the laws of washing the hands in the morning, and we just finished today the first halakha, the first law in the washing of the hands.
Okay. And last question, this is off the subject, but on the subject. You spoke about the greatest source of Yeush, the greatest source of despair. Can you kind of explain again, just very briefly, what causes that Yeush, that despair?
Sure.
Those things in an individual and a Jew.
Right. Okay. So this is an amazing question, and this is obviously the ikar of our whole generation. And this is where Rabbi Nachman despite the fact that he packs punch in every area. It's specifically this area that's so life transforming. So, and it goes, it's a difficult topic, because what Rabbi Nachman suggests for us to remove ourselves from Yeush, from despair, it actually goes against everything that we're taught. So we're going to go through a couple things. The first thing that Rabbi Nachman says causes despair within a Jew is secular knowledge, secular wisdom. Now, what's the reason? Is it because he's a religious fanatic? Is it because he's an extremist that he's saying that we shouldn't be learning secular wisdom? It's actually based on very, very deep Kabbalah and Chassidut. And that is simply to say, and Rav Natan is the one who expresses the difference, that the whole difference between the wisdom of the Torah and the wisdom of anything else is that the wisdom of the Torah lends itself and builds within a Jewish soul the capacity for emunah, belief that Hashem creates and recreates existence at every moment, that he is machadishing, he is renewing reality at every stage, that he is causing the events that take place in a person's life, that he is the life force in which infuses all aspects of reality, and that there's nothing else besides him. That's called emunah, that's called da'at. And this only comes from the Torah. Now, we know that Pesach, which is coming up, represents the redemption, represents the geula from belief in Mitzrayim, from belief in secular wisdom, from belief in nature. So what's the reason why it's a sort of chametz? What's the reason you're not allowed to have breadcrumbs in your house, to the extent that even if you have one piece of bread in your house, you're over on a mitzvah d'oraita? It seems too much. It seems unnecessary and overwhelming and stressful. But the answer is very deep, because it's hinting to that every piece of wisdom, of knowledge, which enters into the mind and heart of a Jewish person has a tremendously deep effect. And it's just the power of education. It's the power of understanding. It's the power of knowledge, because it's rooted in the mind. And as a result of that, it expresses itself in every aspect of a person's being. But Rabbi Nachman is coming to say, and it's really based on the teachings that the Baal Shem Tov and the Baal Tanya speaks about as well. All the Hasidic masters stress it, which is why you see them go into societies and they don't allow secular wisdom into their schools. It's not because they're religious fanatics, even though it's what it appears like to the secular world and even to the religious Jewish world outside of the world of Chassidut. But the reason is based on very deep understanding of the fact that whenever a person lets in secular wisdom, that secular wisdom becomes, Rabbi Nachman says in the 5th Torah of the Likutey, it turns into, so to speak, a remote island within that person's mind. And that remote island then branches off and becomes the life force and the origin of Yeush, of hopelessness. Because the whole concept of Yeush, of feeling hopeless, Rabbi Nachman says it's a lie, it's a sheker. Where is a person feeling hopeless from? It's because at some moment in this person's life, he has invested himself in a reality that Hashem is not causing what's taking place to him, and that Hashem can't change what's happening to him. That he is, he must always remain the same. He's never going to change. His circumstances are always going to be like this. He's always going to feel like this. He's never going to be free. He's never going to feel peace in his life. He's never going to feel joy in his life. That he's always going to have these issues. They got him from his parents. He got them from society. He's done for. He's cooked. So all of these things come from secular wisdom. However, a Jewish neshama, that he's never touched secular wisdom. So all he knows is that Hashem causes whatever happens, and Hashem does whatever he wants. And just like up until this point, he's made this person like this and experienced these things, Hashem, if he wants to, in the next moment can change everything. And to show how deep this is, that this is the whole fundamental aspect of Jewish faith, that we believe that. And also, to what degree it enslaves a person not to believe that, because that's the whole Ikar Rabbi Nachman says of Mitzrayim, the whole experience of the slavery of the 210 years that we had in Mitzrayim, which was supposed to last over 400 years. That was all because of Yeush. That was all because of hopelessness. That was all because that we had imbibed, we had drinking in the wisdom of Mitzrayim, which Rabbi Nachman says is the Chochmah of Teva. that because of our constant connection and drawing in the wisdom of Teva, as a result of that, we then believe that we don't have a shot, that we don't believe that things can change, because we have invested in the belief that things have to be, and they are, that there's cause and effect. Things happen, now this is the result. It can't change.
Is this kind of what David Hamelech was referring to in the Tehillim in 27, where he talked about his enemies? It wasn't that he was necessarily talking about the outside enemies, but it was the enemies within that he was crying out to Hashem to save him from, right?
So this is exactly what the Hasidic masters explain, that the prime enemies in which David was speaking about was his own inner enemies and not external enemies. And that's why Rabbi Nachman says in the Likutey that for a Jew to be able to overcome all of his challenges in his life, he needs to say Tehillim every day. Why does he have to say Tehillim every day? David speaking about all of these different circumstances that I don't have in my life. He's a king of an entire nation who's fighting physical wars against other nations. He's constantly a threat of being dethroned and having people backstab him and try to rise to power. What does that have to do with me in 2021, doing whatever I'm doing? And the answer is that all of these experiences that David had are really speaking about inner psycho-spiritual experiences. And these apply to each of us in our own way. And that's why Rabbi Nachman says that your ability to see the fruit of saying Tehillim is when you see yourself in whatever David's saying. That's when you feel the koach and the power of what he's saying. And that gives you the power to actually overcome your own personal, spiritual, and otherwise enemies. So that's one thing, is the secular wisdom. Another thing, which is connected to it, which derives from the secular wisdom, is that Rabbi Nachman says that once a Jewish person is now imbibing and drinking those waters of secular wisdom, that what ends up happening is it increases his taivas, that it now increases his desire for limitation, for physicality, as his main life force. Which is why you see that, in fact, what happens when a person starts watching TV and he's, Netflix and chill. So now, before you know it, he has a pint of ice cream in his hand and he's chewing away on popcorn and chips and all of these things. And then he ends up falling asleep. So what is this whole entire experience? All one connected experience. And then as a result of that, he feels yeyush, and this is the hidden part of it, that this is removing his life force, his belief in Hashem, his belief that anything can change at any moment. It's this experience of secular wisdom combined with my engaging in the physical world beyond what I actually need and making it my main source of life force instead of subsidiary or secondary, that I'm not using it anymore as a vehicle to experience godliness, which is the physical world. I've made it actually my primary goal in life. And it's these two things which create the main form of hopelessness. And this is why Rabbi Nachman, much of the ikar of what he's working on with us is to be able to become masters of the Brit, which is the all-encompassing quality of overcoming all of our taivas, and at the same time as well, mitigating and decreasing our attachment to secular wisdom. And through these two things, we're able to experience this real emunah that Rabbi Nachman speaks about, that is pulsating within the soul of every Jew, but which is completely concealed. And as a result, he feels yeyush due to these factors. Okay. Any final questions before we end?
I have a question. Hi.
Hi.
So you said like you went to see the Bialy Rebbe and you asked for advice, and you said that if someone like that gives you, or is it any rabbi that gives you advice?
Not any rabbi. If you go to a big tzaddik, if you go to someone who's legitimate, that he's renowned for his wisdom, his advice, his leadership, people who are Baki expert in the Torah of the Arizal and the Baal Shem Tov, like the Hasidic masters are, someone who that people go from all around the world for advice, have seen success, and that he's not a what's it called? He's not a magician, meaning he's the real deal. So if that's the case and you go to somebody like that, so there's implications. that as a result of getting Eitzah from that tzaddik, the best thing that you could do is take that advice, regardless if it makes sense to you.
So, okay. So if they told me, if someone like that, because I've gone to the Bialy Rebbe, told me to add a name to my name, then is that something I have to, I know that's like a big deal, but do I
If he
have to
tells you
listen
to,
that?
it's a good idea to. Yeah.
To listen? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Hatzlacha.
Thanks.
Sure. Okay, guys, everybody have an amazing day. Tonight, we're going to have the continuation of our Torah in Likutey Moran, which Baruch Hashem has gone really, really well. Thank God. It's been an amazing, amazing experience to go and do this 6th Torah and to get really into the nitty gritty of it. Bezrat Hashem, we're going to continue tonight at 9 p.m. at Od Yosef Chai. If you're in Queens, the best thing you could possibly do is hear Torah live from the mouth of a person who's teaching it. Rabbi Nachman speaks about this in many different places. So if you're local, try to come. If not, so watch online at 9 p.m. And Bezrat Hashem, we're going to get closer and closer to Hashem, closer to Yemot Mashiach, closer to the Beit HaMikdash, closer to Geula. Everybody have an amazing, amazing day. And Bezrat Hashem, we'll be in touch.